Hey everybody, Brady here from BGWX, and we're going to be breaking down the potential for snow this weekend and early next week. There's more to go on with this pattern, but this will focus on the potential, I believe, for there to be snow to even a potentially minor snowstorm this weekend. So, without further ado, take a walk with me and let's break this down here, see what we got going on. So, first, we're taking a look at the Euro here. Just had our OZ suite of models here come out. Again, I encourage you all to ask questions as well. Again, like and subscribe if you haven't already. As we look at this here, this is a little bit of a setup here where we have this boundary setting up here, and this is going to produce some rain and snow on Saturday. This moves through mostly rain for a lot of people, with some interior snow potentially centered around the western northeast into northern New England as well, maybe even central New England, maybe some lighter non-accumulating snowflakes potentially on the backside for some other locations closer to the coast. But for the most part, pretty nuisance event for many. But the idea here is, as we progress, what happens is we get this polar vortex stretch to go on here. This kind of sets the stage now. This cold air is going to dive in behind um, in behind that boundary that sets up here, and this is kind of what sets the stage, right? So we have unique this boundary here right along the Gulf Coast and along the Atlantic here. This kind of sets up, and then we have this short wave that comes in on the southwest side of where this polar vortex and this trough digs down, and our cold air is going to come down, press down into the central U.S. here, across a lot of the U.S. And this will bring maybe the coldest air of the season for a lot of people. And that's saying a lot because we've had a pretty cold start already. And what's going to happen here is if we go here to 500 height anomalies, what we have here is we have this again, we have this western ridge in place. So this cold air comes down into the central US, but we also do at the same time, we have this Atlantic ridge in place as well. So we have ridging on both sides. So what kind of it forces a storm track to go up the coast here. And so it's going to make it difficult for this to be too suppressed, in my opinion. And that's why it's worth tracking, even though it's a little complex here because we have this boundary that's stringing out this vorticity here. Again, we're looking at 500 millibar vorticity, meaning here in the atmosphere, if we draw a vertical column, imagine a 3D column in the atmosphere I'm drawing here. This is where we start looking at the upper levels of the atmosphere to be about 500 millibars, and then imagine higher up would be 250, and then imagine if we go a little bit lower, imagine about 850 in the lower levels of the atmosphere, 700 mid levels, and then kind of here's the surface. That's where we live, I believe, most of us. Unless you live on Mount Everest, but that's where most of us live. So that's the idea of what we're looking at. It's how strong the spin is here at 500 millibars, and this is a really good tool for forecasting here. This tells more of a story than those colored precipitation type maps that a lot of people love to look at here. And the idea is, as this upper level energy swings through, this we're gonna have actually a pretty decent upper level low. It's actually not doesn't the on this run it doesn't quite get out ahead as much on this run, but we do see it interact with the boundary a little bit more on this run on the Euro. So you get a little bit more precipitation, and as the system swings through here, it interacts. This upper level low forms here with the boundary before I start breaking down runs. And this allows for an opportunity potentially, and I'm going to make it one more smaller, the pen tool here, and this gives an opportunity here within this upper level low for accumulating snowfall potentially. And that's going to be where the focus is. And then the matter is, if there's enough interaction with this boundary, that's going to draw in more moisture and allow this area to have more significant accumulation. And one model that shows that, for example, is the Canadian. So if I slide here, and the Canadian shows that, you can see it's a stronger upper level energy. It's able to interact with that boundary more. You see the upper level energy also gets out ahead a little bit more amplified than the euro, and it slides up the coast a little bit more. You can see at 500 height anomaly versus vorticity, you can see a little bit stronger of an eastern ridge in the Atlantic here. And this will be key to see how strong this ridge is, and that will kind of be an indicating factor of how much precipitation can kind of slide up the coast here versus and come into that upper level low and help consolidate and form that upper level low earlier in our low pressure system versus versus being suppressed and kind of getting caught a little bit flatter. In an example of something like that would be if we slide here to the GFS, you can notice that the GFS, you can see a little bit weaker, or one of the more weaker solutions, actually coming along more this run. One of the main differences, though, still is how far you see the placement of the upper level low here, and I'll zoom in a little bit more for those on a smaller screen. You see the placement of the upper level low. There's a Canadian, there's the GFS. You see a little bit more behind. That was one of the run-to-run changes we saw here. OZ to 18Z again. This timing is Sunday to Monday we're looking at here. And so as this comes through, you can see GFS, this is a system the GFS is going to struggle with. Interaction with the boundary, pulling moisture into the upper level low, matter of upper level dynamics and consolidation here, and the cyclogenesis process simply meaning intensifying the surface low pressure, intensifying the beginning stages here of what is going to turn into a cyclone. This is something that it's just a fancy term for storm. And it is something that the GFS is going to struggle with, because if you look here, the upper level low, really you can see how all this convection out here kind of gets wasted a little bit. The more this we can pull in here, the more moisture you see over where your upper level low is. And so this is a sneaky system here, in my opinion, that I think a lot of people might be overlooking a little bit because of what you see on the surface maps. But every time you look at the upper level low, it really calls for the potential for there to be a pretty notable event, and the Canadian really highlights that potential that we have here with the system. They may be overdoing it a little bit potentially. I'm not sure quite yet, but you can see the Euro's not so far off. Really, all these models aren't too far off with the placement here of the upper level energy. If you notice, the GFS is a little bit farther off from the Euro and the Canadian, so I will lean towards the Euro and the Canadian for now. Kind of an in between of that, I feel like is a good bet. But the GFS coming around a little bit more actually has a little bit of an inverted trough because it is unable to consolidate the upper level energy here. You can see it gets a little messy and strung out, and doesn't consolidate it well, so it gets a little bit of an inverted trough if you look at the surface map here on this run. But I really urge people to use caution when looking at these surface maps. I think they're really messy. I think they're not necessary to overlook at too much. I don't think it's a valid. I don't think they're valid to put so much stock in. I think where it really resides in is the upper level energy. And one thing that I think that has the system going in favor for this to potentially be a notable accumulating snow event is if I slide here to no, I can keep it here, but I'm gonna go to the Canadian because it will highlight it just a little bit better for the point I'm trying to make. Go to 850 first, and we're gonna go to anomaly. Is look at the temperature gradient here. Look at the baroclinic zone we create, meaning the difference in temperature over this area. You see, look at the map there. You see those real deep, pinks, blues, greens. That's that cold air over that's coming in. That's our polar vortex stretch we're seeing. That's a very below average temperatures that we're seeing in that area. And then you can see those you see those reds, off over here. You see the reds and the whites and the almost hot pinks, versus the magentas and blues. That's that contrast in temperature in this area. And so this baroclinic zone sets up here. Again, fancy just for the action area where the cold air meets the warm air. And that's where we look at for the potential for that storm to set up. You can see the Canadian has a stronger storm and a notable significant snowstorm actually on the Canadian. Now, I'm not saying, that's going to happen quite like that. In fact, I would even say maybe it's a little bit too far interior potentially, but it's highlighting that threat here that you can see that's a notable upper level low that develops and turns into a pretty strong storm actually, rather soon. You can see that ends up being an absolute bomb of a storm, and Maine gets hit very good on this Atlantic Canada there. So you can kind of see maybe the potential that sets up here, and that cold air meeting that warm air is such a good recipe to be able to, and that's an important part of winter storms and getting notable banding here. So if I slide here again to surface and temperatures, you'll notice the so we the and that's going to be a matter. You can see how much of this warm air here along this bound you can see that sets up how much can we pull in to meet this cold air, because we're going to have a look at the gradient we have over this area. You can see that. Look at this gradient here. Very warm temperatures, meaning very cold temperatures. It's just not a super tight gradient. The tighter the gradient, the more significant, banding you can see set up and more significant storm take place. And it's not a major, all out, 1 to 2 foot blockbuster snowstorm. It's not one of those because it's going to be moving too quick, likely, and just not going to be able to slow down in time, bearing some crazy, model change in the unforeseeable. That's very unlikely. The Canadian is probably one of the more significant higher ceiling outcomes with this event. But you can see here what this does is it'll let even though we don't have significant, upper level jet stream, those winds aren't super strong. What you do um, is create significant 700 banding here, and you can see, look at that. That's strong. If I zoom in here, you create very notable here at 700 millibars. Remember where we are in the atmosphere. So now we're in the mid levels. We're below 500 millibars, but still above the surface here. So again, remember we created that column in the atmosphere. Imagine I'm going to go back to pink here. We created that column in the atmosphere, and this is remember this was about 500. Now this is more about 700. Imagine this is about 850, and then the surface. It's not a great depiction, but so now we're about here in the atmosphere, 700 millibars, and this is where we look at often for for banding. It's very useful to look at for where banding sets up, and you like to look just on the north side typically, or the western side of that 700 millibar banding. And you can see here, you get notable banding that sets up here, and it's more interior solution, but you can see how well developed the 700 millibar banding here, indicative of pretty significant banding, and it's displaying the strength of that thermal gradient that we create in place here, and that baroclinic zone I'm referring to it as, that really allows us to set up the potential for notable snow accumulation. And also you can see it even on some of the weaker solutions here, like the GFS. You can see it has all that convection, and it's a little bit late, and even though it doesn't, since it's an inverted trough almost setup, it doesn't really get it going. Look how much convection is out here, and it's very close. You can see kind of the banding kind of consolidate almost. Still notable, you can see lots of convection out here to tap into, and GFS does have a progressive bias, and it is struggling. It's in a bit of a slump right now, it appears, the GFS. So this is a setup here where you'll see the GFS likely struggle a little bit in all lean, weaker and progressive, as we've seen. It also just wasn't close with the upper level energy. Look at the difference at 500 here. You can see a notable difference. And here in this setup, I would look at this area to be able to get some notable accumulations here, just based on the 500 look. And 500 tells the story, I believe, more than those surface maps do. And you can look at the Euro, and you can see GFS is behind, and the euro just doesn't consolidate the upper level low. It fails to wrap in some of this convection just a little bit soon enough, and it's a small difference right there between it being, a lighter snow event and a borderline snowstorm. In some of these model runs, and you can see here at 700 again, kind of where we've been looking at. You can see euro does kind of get going more than the GFS, closer, but not quite Canadian, obviously. And you can see some notable banding that takes place here over southeastern New England on this run. And but that's kind of the idea. And you can see some of these earlier Euro runs though earlier today showing that. Take a look, and that's displaying a little bit closer to the potential I think we have here. Look at that area of lift here in this across southern New England. Look at that 700 millibar banding developing there. Very impressive. And you can see this gets going early on, potentially. Maybe Delmarva, hard to say. Maybe. I think it would be harder if you do have a more notable event. I think I would wouldn't favor this area potentially. It would be close to say how this sets up, but just if we do have a more notable, significant accumulating event, I think it would favor more. I even created a threat map. I think it would favor more this area right here. You can see the map I kind of drew out here. So this is the area kind of favoring. Again, I used the whole map just so I could get my DC folks into it this time. It's not the snowfall map, but just a threat map. I kind of the idea for the best chance for accumulating snowfall. Because if it is a notable accumulating snowfall too, because if it is a notable event, it's not going to be tethered to just the coastline. It's not gonna be tethered to just like a very coastal scraper. If it is a notable accumulating snow event, then this will be further interior areas. And you can see it, it could be closer. It could have expanded this maybe up more into Maine if it is a notable accumulating event because it will drive more northward quicker. But I think this is something models are struggling with a little bit right now on the P-type map. And I think the answers reside right now in the upper levels above the surface. I think you have to look at 500 and 700 right now, and that is where the clues reside. So if we go back here, and I think this kind of tells the story for me, even though it's still a bit progressive, and that cold air is definitely going to press, as you can see in the trough here, and that is a concern. This could be too little too progressive, and maybe gets strung out along the boundary, and it's not able to wrap in enough of the boundary of that convection off of that to be able to have a significant snow event potentially. But this, just at face value, I think this setup is going to allow more moisture to ride up the coast potentially. Just a little bit more than what you see on models. It's really not that massive of a change from what they show now. Really minor tweaks will be the difference between, models showing like, 1 to 3, 3, 4 versus, 5, 6, 7, for example, on model. So I do think if this does hit, it's more the 3 to 6, 4 to 8 kind of event. I'm not fully bought in on it quite being that quite yet, but I think that this is the best area. That if we do see, this thing start taking place, and I think there's a decent shot here. Um, I think this is the area to kind of keep an eye on for, accumulating snowfall here. And in a crazier scenario, this could extend further northwest in the interior. But if it were more Canadian-like, but you can't, quite go with the strongest model. You kind of have to take an in between right now. And I'm leaning more heavily on the Euro and the Canadian, but also just based on more of my meteorology for how I think this plays out. Again, I'm not a genius, but those are just kind of my thoughts, and I gotta make a forecast, and so those are my current thoughts, and I'll adjust accordingly if need so. But I've kind of had the same thoughts now for at least in about a day and a half ish, kind of about a little over a day now, and yeah. So this is what I got. We'll have more to track going forward here. We'll keep an eye down the line for more. There's some could be some interesting time frames. Maybe again, keep an eye. Maybe 22nd, 25th down the line. There's some time frames, but we'll discuss those more on the next live stream. We do again. Reminder: please hit that like button if you haven't already. Subscribe if you are new potentially, and here on YouTube. And we do live streams quite often. That's the specialty here. That's what kind of makes this channel unique. We do in-depth analysis, simplified here, with the idea of having you trying to understand my thought process for our forecast, but also the thought process behind what's driving some of these factors in the atmosphere here for big time, snow events and storms. And this is kind of the area again we're watching, in my opinion, to watch for potential accumulating snow. And this is, I think we have a pretty good second reload of the pattern here. And I think it's going to be a pretty decent winter going forward as well. So keep tuning in here. We're going to, there'll be plenty more live streams to have this winter quite frequently. Hopefully, we'll be able to do that. And yeah, going forward, it should be fun time. So I appreciate you all. And I will see you all soon. Peace.